Hi, my name is Mr. Scary. Please subscribe and like. Also, share in the comments what topics you would like to hear a story about. Maxim always knew that his grandmother's old house held something sinister within its walls. As a child, he often spent his summer vacations there, and each time he felt like someone was watching him. When his grandmother passed away, the house was inherited by his parents. Soon after, the family moved to another city, leaving the house abandoned. Several years passed, and now Maxim, a university student, decided to spend the weekend there alone. He wanted to reminisce about his childhood, to spend some time in peace and quiet. He arrived late in the evening, feeling a wave of memories wash over him. The house looked the same as it did years ago. Old furniture, creaky floors, dusty corners. Maxim unpacked his things and decided to walk around the house. Soon, Maxim noticed strange sounds coming from the basement. They were quiet, muffled rustling noises, as if someone was moving furniture. He decided to ignore it, attributing it to the house's age. The night was quiet, but Maxim struggled to fall asleep. At midnight, he heard footsteps in the hallway. They were heavy, slow, but constant. He got out of bed and, trembling with fear, stepped into the hallway. There was no one there. Maxim returned to his room, locked the door, and tried to sleep. But the footsteps continued all night, preventing him from finding peace. In the morning, as dawn barely broke, Maxim decided to inspect the house more thoroughly. He found his grandmother's old room locked. Finding the keys, he opened the door and stepped inside. Among the old belongings, he discovered strange notes. In her diary, his grandmother wrote about hearing the same footsteps at night. She also mentioned mysterious shadows she saw in the mirror. Maxim realized that something was indeed wrong with the house. He decided to check the basement, from where he had heard the rustling noises the previous night. The basement was cold and dark, the air stale. Using a flashlight, Maxim found old trunks and shelves covered in dust. Among the old items, he came across an antique doll with faded eyes. The doll seemed alive and stared straight at him. Returning to the house, Maxim noticed that it was starting to get dark outside. Suddenly, the electricity went out. Maxim lit several candles and tried to calm down, but he felt like someone was watching him again. He heard the footsteps again, this time louder and closer. He hid in the bedroom, bolting the door. But the footsteps didn't stop. They came closer and closer. At some point, Maxim heard the door handle slowly turning. He held his breath. The door creaked open and a shadow entered the room. It was tall and shapeless, with empty eyes glowing in the darkness. Maxim tried to scream, but no sound came out. The shadow approached him and extended a hand. At that moment, Maxim lost consciousness. Maxim was found only the next day. His parents returned to the house and discovered him unconscious on the bedroom floor. Doctors said he had experienced severe shock but couldn't explain the cause. When Maxim came to, he couldn't remember what had happened that night. But one thing he knew for sure: he would never return to that house. His parents decided to sell the house and soon found a buyer. The new owner was thrilled to acquire such an old mansion at a low price. But the story didn't end there. A few months later, Maxim received a letter from the new owner of the house. In the letter, it said that he, too, had started hearing footsteps at night and seeing shadows. The owner begged Maxim to tell him what had happened that night. Maxim didn't know what to say. He only knew that the house wouldn't let go of its secret guests so easily. The story of the house continued. People who lived there always heard footsteps and saw shadows. The house kept its secrets and continued to frighten those who dared to live there. Maxim tried to forget about the house forever, but the nightmares wouldn't leave him. In them, he heard those footsteps again and again, felt the presence of the shadow, and saw the glowing empty eyes. He knew the house would never let him go, that he would always be part of this sinister story. It was the first time Sarah was left alone at home for an entire weekend. Her parents had gone out of town to celebrate their anniversary, leaving her in charge of the house. Sarah, being 17 and confident, looked forward to the independence. She spent the evening watching movies and chatting with friends. The house, an old Victorian mansion, creaked and groaned as usual, but she paid little attention to the familiar sounds. As midnight approached, Sarah heard a distinct thud from the attic. Initially, she dismissed it as the house settling, but the sound repeated, more pronounced this time. Deciding to investigate, she grabbed a flashlight and slowly ascended the narrow staircase to the attic. The attic was filled with old furniture, boxes of forgotten items, and layers of dust. Sarah's flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. She saw nothing out of the ordinary and returned downstairs, convincing herself it was just her imagination. The next day, Sarah went about her usual routine. However, she couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. As the evening drew near, she decided to explore the attic more thoroughly. Among the old boxes, she found a dusty trunk. Inside, there were old family photos, letters, and a small, ornate box. Opening the box, she discovered an old key and a note that read, "Do not disturb the shadows." Curious and a bit unnerved, Sarah pocketed the key and decided to call it a night. She secured all the doors and windows before heading to bed. As she drifted off to sleep, she heard the same thudding noise from the attic, this time followed by a faint whispering. The whispering grew louder as the night wore on. It seemed to be calling her name, sending chills down her spine. Gathering her courage, Sarah decided to use the key she found. She climbed up to the attic, the air growing colder with each step. She found an old, locked cabinet in a dark corner and used the key to open it. Inside was an ancient-looking mirror covered in a heavy cloth. Removing the cloth, she gazed into the mirror. At first, she saw only her reflection, but soon shadows began to move behind her. Turning around quickly, she found the attic empty. When she looked back at the mirror, a dark figure stood behind her reflection. Terrified, she ran back to her room and locked the door. The following day, Sarah tried to convince herself it was just a nightmare. However, the whispering continued, now audible even during the day. Objects in the house started moving on their own, and she felt cold drafts in rooms with no windows open. Determined to uncover the truth, she researched the house's history. She discovered that the house once belonged to a reclusive man who practiced dark arts. It was rumored that he summoned spirits and trapped them in objects around the house. The mirror in the attic was said to be the most powerful of these objects, containing the spirit of a particularly malevolent entity. That night, the activity intensified. Lights flickered, doors slammed, and the whispering turned into a guttural growl. Sarah realized she had to confront whatever was haunting her. She took the mirror from the attic and placed it in the living room. Armed with nothing but her will, she demanded the spirit reveal itself. The room grew icy, and the figure from the mirror materialized in front of her. It was a shadowy, indistinct form, its eyes glowing with malevolence. Sarah held her ground, reciting a protective incantation she found in one of the old letters from the trunk. The spirit shrieked and lunged at her, but was repelled by the words. The mirror cracked, and the spirit let out a final deafening scream before dissipating into the air. The house fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. Exhausted but relieved, Sarah spent the rest of the night in a daze. The next morning, she called her parents and told them everything. They returned immediately, skeptical but concerned for her well-being. The house seemed normal again, the eerie presence gone. Sarah's parents decided to have the house blessed by a priest, and the mirror was disposed of. Though the haunting ceased, Sarah never forgot the terror she faced. She learned to respect the unknown and vowed never to meddle with things beyond her understanding. And so, the old Victorian house returned to its quiet existence, but the memory of that haunted weekend stayed with Sarah, a reminder of the shadows that sometimes dwell just beyond the edge of our sight. Emma's parents had gone out of town for a business trip, leaving her alone in their large, secluded house. A fierce storm raged outside, the wind howling and rain pounding against the windows. Emma, trying to enjoy her solitude, curled up on the couch with a book and a cup of hot tea. The house, built in the 1800s, was full of creaks and groans, which she usually found charming but now seemed unnerving. As the storm intensified, the lights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. Emma heard a faint tapping sound, at first thinking it was a branch against a window, but the tapping grew more rhythmic and deliberate, seeming to come from inside the house. The landline rang, its sharp sound making Emma jump. She answered it, hearing nothing but static. After a few seconds, a voice whispered, "I'm watching you." Terrified, Emma hung up and immediately called her parents. They assured her it was just a prank and told her to stay calm. Trying to shake off the fear, Emma checked all the locks on the doors and windows. She then returned to the living room, but the uneasy feeling remained. The tapping noise continued, now accompanied by what sounded like faint footsteps in the hallway above. Emma decided to call her best friend, Sarah, for some company, even if only over the phone. As they talked, Sarah suggested Emma check the attic, where the noises seemed to originate. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of dread, Emma climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. The attic was a dusty, cluttered space filled with old furniture and forgotten belongings. As she shone the flashlight around, she caught a glimpse of something moving in the corner. Her heart pounded as she approached, but it was just an old sheet fluttering in the draft. She sighed with relief, but the feeling of being watched intensified. Back downstairs, Emma tried to distract herself by watching TV. The storm caused a power outage, plunging the house into darkness. She fumbled for candles and matches, lighting them to cast a dim glow around the room. While searching for more candles in the basement, Emma stumbled upon an old, locked chest. Using a hairpin, she managed to pick the lock. Inside were old photographs, letters, and a peculiar doll with a sinister expression. Among the letters was one from the previous owner, warning about a malevolent presence in the house. The tapping and footsteps grew louder and more insistent. Emma felt a cold draft, though all windows were closed. Suddenly, the candles blew out, leaving her in complete darkness. She heard heavy breathing behind her. Terrified, she turned around, but saw nothing. Frantically, she groped for her phone to call the police. As she dialed, the voice from the earlier phone call spoke again, this time from right behind her. "You can't hide from me." Emma screamed and ran to the front door, finding it locked from the outside. With no way out, Emma ran back to the basement, hoping to find something to defend herself with. She heard footsteps following her, getting closer. In a desperate move, she hid behind the furnace, trying to quiet her breathing. The footsteps stopped at the top of the stairs. The silence was deafening. Emma held her breath, praying the intruder wouldn't find her. Minutes felt like hours. Just when she thought she was safe, a cold hand grabbed her shoulder. At that moment, headlights flashed through the basement window. Her parents had come home early. The front door burst open, and her father's voice called out her name. The grip on her shoulder loosened, and the presence vanished. Emma rushed upstairs, tears streaming down her face. She explained everything to her parents. They searched the house but found no trace of anyone else. The storm had caused some doors to jam, and they chalked it up to her imagination, but Emma knew better. Emma never stayed alone in the house again. The old Victorian was sold, and her family moved to a new home. The nightmares persisted for months, always the same. She was alone in the house, and something was watching her. Years later, she read in the news that the new owners had also experienced strange occurrences. The house, it seemed, had a silent watcher that would never leave, and so the legend of the silent watcher in the old Victorian house continued, a chilling reminder of the things that go bump in the night when you are home alone.